first time I heard this album, it was spring of 2000, and I had my first job in education. I didn't even know I wanted to be in education. I just knew that like one of my favorite musicians, Sting, was an English teacher. So I was like, oh, if you play music, then you also work in a school because you get summers off because that math works out. And so I was a kindergarten assistant at a charter school in New York. It was one of the first charter schools ever. It was on the corner of 125th and Lenox. And so I would take the train to work, and you'd hear this record everywhere, everywhere. You'd hear people, you'd hear it coming out of the radios, you'd hear it in the cars, people walking by you would be playing it. And then the part of it, there were two things that I heard. One was Spanish Joint. I would hear that one a lot, and it reminded me of being a little kid in the Bronx and hearing similar. Oh, I'm sorry, not Spanish Joint. Feel Like Making Love. That song, I would hear that all the time when I was like in third grade, and we'd go roller skating. They would always play the original of that in the roller rink, and so it really connected me to like being that age and being similar to the kids that I was working with. And then the final thing, there were fifth graders, and they did this little performance where their moms came, and each kid gave their mom a rose, and the song that they picked, which is in hindsight now kind of creepy, was "How Does It Feel?" And I just remember hearing this song and thinking, how does this album capture street life, capture the way I relate to being a kid, and also capture this bond that you have with your family? How did that happen all in one R&B record? This isn't just an R&B record. Okay, that's my first time.
Man, for me, it was. I'm a little younger. I didn't hear this album until summer of 2004. I was 14, and I was working at the Houston Zoo, and there was this woman that worked at the zoo that I often worked with. Her name is Sarah Fern, and she, like, when I first started working there, she was like, "Hey, like, have you ever heard of Mos Def?" And I was like, well, "Of course." Like, I was like, I am from Houston, but like, I know what happens in New York City. Like, I know where hip hop lives. And she was like, "Okay, well, like, have you heard of Black Star?" And I was like, "I haven't heard the album." So she like burnt this CD and gave me this Black Star album with Kweli and Mos Def. And so she became like this, like, she was like feeding me mixtapes like at work, like, "Oh, you should listen to this. You should listen." So she gave me Voodoo at one point. Was like, "Yeah, this is like the future of the sound of R&B." And I was like, "Okay, whatever, cool, right?" So I listened to it, and I was like, "Man, this is good stuff." And obviously, like, "How Does It Feel?" which is now, I put it in like if we were to make a Black Anthems album, like, it belongs in that, like, Mount Rushmore Black Anthems album. So, but I was just into neo
Yes.
soul, yeah, like, I was into neo soul. Like, I found Badu at the same time, so it was just like, Bilal, like those voices. I was like, man, this is it right now. So, yeah, I was 14, summer, working at the Houston Zoo.
Voodoo was everything to me. Like, Voodoo transformed my life. 2004, strangely enough, Mike Yates, in a UMass dank, like, in many definitions of the word dank, dorm room, hearing it at the Massiversity of Unichusetts, ZooMass, in Amherst, Massachusetts, and crying, like, just being deeply moved, right? Because all of that music I grew up listening to as a kid was represented, and new sounds that, like, Jay Dilla or Questlove playing behind the beat, things that I didn't understand were right in front of me, right? And Voodoo's a deeply spiritual album, right? It totally plays on gospel and R&B and, like, Haitian voodoo. There's so much there, right? But I would say that Voodoo got me into teaching. Voodoo got me into the career trajectory and the work I do now. And Spanish Joint, Charlie Hunter, 8-string guitar, bass chords on top.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't even know what I was listening to, right? And all those interludes, like in Chicken Grease or like Player, like all of those moments where you had to then search later on for them, like that transformed how I thought and listened to music. I chose my roommates in the future because of D'Angelo and Fela Kuti and all these musicians I loved, right? Because music was such a huge part of that space. Welcome to this Unrulr podcast about music and education, and about how we create essentially a collective in your classroom and in your school, like Soulquarians. Like this, I'm the goofy person that wore the shirt on the video podcast episode. I'm joined by Kwaku Aning, director for the Center of Innovation and Entrepreneurial Thinking at an awesome school in San Diego, and Mike Yates, senior product manager at the Reinvention Lab for Teach for America, TFA. I'm joined by two friends, people I have imposter syndrome for being on a podcast with. But just like, let's start the conversation. Let's talk about this idea of the collective. Let's talk about this idea of kind of Soulquarians and Voodoo as a use case.
So, all right, I want to say this first of all. You keep saying the imposter syndrome. And Mike won't admit it, but I feel that way about him constantly. I've called him once, and I'm like, "Hey, can I call you?" Look at him; he's shaking his head. It's good that it's on video because I like to embarrass people where you can see it. I will call him and just be like, "Hey, what are you thinking about? What is happening in your head?" But this is about D'Angelo, so I'm just going to embarrass you for 2 minutes. So we all have it. Is my point in saying that. So I'm going to ask both of you guys.
No one should.
Have you heard? What's that?
No one should. That, it's just little. It's just regular me. I ain't nobody.
I feel the same way, but we all have it. I'm just acknowledging the greatness of everybody in the room, especially Jack Solomon, who will remain silent, but
that's right.
He's on
that's right.
here as well. Yeah. Have you guys heard the story about how they wrote Voodoo?
No.
Tell us.
So I read this because was it like, is this the 20th or 25th or whatever? It's like the 20th anniversary, 23rd, whatever it is, of the album coming out. I read this article, and it was talking about how Questlove and D'Angelo and a bunch of the guys in the band would just watch old Soul Train episodes, or would find videos of like different bands that were like 70s R&B bands for hours, and then they would just go jam. And then the A&R company, the A&R guy from the record company would come in and be like, "What are you doing?" Because they did it at Electric Ladyland Studios, not cheap. And they're like, "Is something going to come out of this?" But that was their process. And so, Aaron, when you were talking about the idea of a collective, and even the idea of how this connects to education, the ability, Mike, I see you nodding your head, so I need you to chime in on this, but the ability of connecting to your history, your forefathers, your culture,
your identity, your
identity, to going backwards to move forward into the future.
Oh my God, yes. Mike, go.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's also like, when I think about some of the greatest undertakings in music history, particularly like hip hop and R&B, I mean, I also think about like Outkast, like down in Atlanta. I think about The Dungeon, right? Like, my wife and I always laugh, and we're like, these kids watching CeeLo Green on The Voice have no idea that man was part of Goody Mob. And
yep.
Like when you think
another
about
another dope collective, of people coming together.
Exactly, yeah. And Voodoo, like D'Angelo, really was part of this. Like he was one of the. He and I feel like Questlove and obviously Dilla, like they were leaders in this neo soul movement that was really interesting, because for the first time, like me as a black kid who grew up weird, I was like, all of them are weird. And like they were giving people, like by being together, they were giving us strange black kids permission to be together and like to be out in the open. So I thought, like, I'm from Texas. I live in Dallas. In Dallas, you can see, I mean, black people in Dallas, we have this thing called Badu sightings. Like you can see her like out in the real world. Like, and she'll like sit down and have a conversation with you. Like if you see Badu in the mall in Dallas, just be like, Erica, and she'll sit down and talk to you. Like she does not think of herself as, and she is truly Black famous in that she can walk through the middle of the mall and like only Black people will know who she is. And Aaron, like if Aaron was there, he would know. but
I'd be trying to like, not look as goofy and white as I am in that exact moment.
I mean,
hello, Erica. I loved Mama's Gun. It was a phenomenal album. I would say seminal at best. Could you tell me about your work experience with Jay Dilla? I heard this one great story about Didn't You Know? Could you tell me more?
I mean, she'd go there though. She'd go there. But I feel like the fact that you can find all of them on each other's music, like you can find Badu on Voodoo, you can find like D'Angelo writing Your Precious Love, right? Like you know, the fact that they seriously took this life seriously, they worked together, they lived together. You know, like we were doing this we were doing these AI hackathons and people kept saying, "Are you guys one organization?" And I kept saying like, "Nah, it's kind of like Good Fridays or it's kind of like the Roots." And they were like, "What?" They didn't understand what I was communicating, but I was like, "No, it's like people that are coming together for one cause," you know. So that idea that collective is powerful, man.
No, and I think like, go for it.
Oh no, go ahead. No, go ahead, Aaron.
I mean, I think like how that is translated into the culture of schools and classrooms. Like when I have felt like the students, the learners, the teachers I'm working with are a collective where we're taking our unique technical skills, like Kwaku, what you were saying, our backgrounds, our ancestries, right? The superpowers, the shitty things that have happened in our lives, right? The incredible moments that have happened in our lives. And we come together and help each other. Like that's what you see on Mama's Gun, Erykah Badu. That's what you see on whatever Commons album is, like Electric Circus, that like super wacky, awesome album. Black Star, Voodoo, right? Like they all took their capacities and they came together, right? And that's become fetishized in tech and startup culture, right? Like the technical founder, the marketer and the storyteller. But like it's always been there in these groups, right? Like it's always been there, even in modern music collectives, you know, that we're starting to see with people, with kids that are in their teens. And so how do we stop? I just want to do that all the time in classrooms. Like I want that spirituality, that the soul of the collective to be there in the learning communities that we're creating.
There's a piece that you mentioned there, the idea of how we've, I don't know if it's fetishized it or even made it this mechanized piece around how creativity happens. So, you know, I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday, and she was talking about how she and her kids have just started watching the Get Back documentary on the Beatles that's on, you know, Disney Channel. And I was telling her, I was like, yeah, I think everybody should watch it because so much of it speaks to the randomness, which isn't random, of creativity. Like you think of groups like you think of D'Angelo, you think of the Beatles, and you think, oh, they came in, they have this master plan, and then they recorded it, and they showed us all the light, and they were in a lab somewhere thinking it up. But that isn't how creativity happens. There, you have a thought, or at least in my experience, you guys can agree, disagree. There's a thought or a concept that you might be chasing, and then maybe you go out and you have a conversation with someone. And then that conversation's like, oh, that's random because I was just thinking about something similar. And so then it gets thrown into the pot of what you're working on. But there's if you aren't leaving space for that magic to happen through that randomness, then the really beautiful original creative moments don't happen. And I think that is a creative piece, that is an education piece, it's a music piece, all of that connects. And so whether that is, oh, well, this piece of gear didn't work, so we had to use this instead to get the sound that we wanted. And then everyone listens to that album and they're like, how did you get that sound? Where did you get that shaker from? That shaker was basically pepper that came in the little plastic container with the pizza, but we didn't have shakers in the studio, so we used that. And the way we mic'd it sounds different, but then other people are trying to recreate that shaker sound. And so if you take that into the school, oh, well, how did you think of doing that lesson? Well, I was talking with the guy who lived across the street from the school about something, and he said something to me the day before I taught that lesson, which tied into what the kids should know about their community, but also what I needed them to know about the content, and being open to that, which I feel speaks to this power of the collective that
Absolutely.
we're sort of touching on, because that collective isn't just tied to the people who are experts, air quotes, but really that collective is tied to that spirituality, that feeling in the air, that, lack of a better word, vibe, where if you're putting this out, I'm trying to create this,
It's in the ether.
it comes back to you, and it's in the ether, and you're surrounded by that energy. Man, I sound super California in saying that, so I'm just going to own that.
Surrounded by the energy, yeah. I almost didn't even understand you in Texas. I was like, what energy? You didn't say Holy Spirit.
Exactly. I am saying Holy Spirit. That's what they call it in California. They call it the energy.
Right. The energy. So funny. Yeah, but I mean, I think one of the things you're getting at is really dope. It's like, I think as educators, like, we have to stop telling each other no, like, when we don't understand, or like, I can't think, I can go on, and I could probably fill a 3-hour podcast with the amount of ideas that I had, where some veteran teacher in a building was like, you can't do that. And I was like, oh, but yeah. I can and I will, right? Like, because the mailman told me, or like,
yes.
When I was teaching at this small 6th grade center in Fort Worth ISD a long time ago, and the building was super old, and we found out that the floors were uneven, and so when we were, I didn't teach science, I taught world cultures, but I was teaching about aqueducts, and I was trying to figure out a way to explain to students just that the slightest of a decline was what carried water hundreds of miles. And so we did this project, it was called Flood the Hallway, where we like lined the hallway with Flex Seal and trash bags to try to see if we could carry little, streams. And all the teachers that were just like, that's never going to work. I was like, but we're going to try it. Right. So I think, like,
yes,
the way to do this is to stop telling each other no, like if it had not been for, shout out to Mr. Bond, I'm going to send this to him, but if it had not been for this art teacher named Chris Bond, he was the teacher next door to me. I'm like laying out trash bags and painter's tape, and he literally came out and was like, bro, hold on, I got something for you. And he came out with spray on Flex Seal and this large, he was like, this is waterproof, this is going to work. Had it not been for somebody like supporting me in that, right? Like, we would have never, and in the end, the project didn't work. It was completely ridiculous. We had a lot of fun. We got in big trouble, but it didn't work, right? But I still tried it, and I had a lot of fun, and none of those kids will ever forget it. Like, I still, to this day, kids are now freshmen in college, and they're like, sophomores in college, they're like, hey, I remember when we almost flooded that hallway out. I really appreciate that. So
yes,
support, man.
I think a lot about what the conditions that had to happen to allow for these records like Voodoo to be created, and the conditions that had to happen in our schools and classrooms that allowed for the beauty and dopeness of like the memories we still remember, right? And I think about authenticity, trust, and respect, right? Trust that you're going to be able to be vulnerable in front of each other. Trust that you can show your flaws and you can get imperfect ideas out into the world, which is at the core of entrepreneurship and the core of good learning, right? We've fucked everything up, it's the technical term, by creating these perfectionist cultures in school where learners don't feel comfortable sharing out imperfect work, right? And then I think about like just the respect that we have to have, right? Like for me, when I was teaching digital journalism, I was a conduit to Kendrick Lamar's videographer, or a writer at the Washington Post, or someone at Twitch. Because my students knew I didn't know about the technical skills that they had, and I had to be a bridge. And they'd be like, oh, cool, Mr. Shorn actually knows things or can connect us to people too, right? And then when they were showing each other these skills, oh my God, Michael Hanano is an incredible videographer. How do I work with him, right? He's a junior. Oh my God. Oh, I didn't even know you could write like this, right? Like, and they saw how they could help each other. That definitely happened with Questlove and Jay Dilla, right? There's stories of them digging in the crates together, and like incredible researchers, a topic for another podcast, like finding like just snippets that could go into Didn't You Know by Erykah Badu, or different songs within Voodoo. And so those conditions were there that allowed for all of that collaboration. And Kwaku, you got at this before, there has to be time. You have to be able to sit in that, right? Like that's
Yeah.
what the cipher is, right?
Yeah.
Is time to be able to commune with each other. And that's what we don't do enough of.
In
Right.
Questlove's first biography, I forget, or his first book, which is his biography, he talks about how D'Angelo approached him to work on his first album, and he turned him down because he didn't know who he was.
He just thought it was another R&B musician.
And after he heard the album, and he heard, because I think Dilla did work on his first album, he was like, "Wait a minute, who is this kid?" And I feel like that was part of how he discovered Dilla. And there's a piece there too around being wrong and having the space to be wrong, which ties into what you were talking about with this perfectionist culture in schools. Even the term unfinished work, the term unfinished work, it's almost like a school construct. In your job, yeah, it's like you have something that you're going to submit, but if you're figuring something out, if you're really part of this thought economy, if you're really a creative, unfinished work doesn't exist. It is the step that you get to, the steps that you go
It is the
through to
process.
figure
Oh,
out
100%.
what it is you're doing. And
Yep.
these albums are all that. Voodoo doesn't exist in the way that it does without the album prior to Voodoo. In the sound of it, having people play live, less production, reaching back more. How does that tie into how people teach or facilitate? How does that tie into how students feel about what they're doing? I'm not even going to call it learning. And Mike exemplifies this because Mike does a ton of stuff, and I think part of his secret weapon is as he's doing it, he's learning, and because each time he posts something different, you see that he's tweaking it a little bit more. I know this sounds really creepy. It sounds like I just like get online and just stalk Mike, which, truth be told, a little bit I do. So I'm going to own that. But every musician does that. Every artist does this. If you've ever taken the Architect, the River tour in Chicago, have you guys done that? Do you know about this? You take this tour, you get on this boat, you go down the middle of Chicago, and then the whole point of the tour is that they're showing you like these different buildings that were put up along the river, and every building, as you progress down, is a reaction to the building before. So based upon what was done on this building or this attempt at design, this next building towards your right was built in reaction to it, where they incorporated design aspects and they tried to push it a little bit further. The same thing happens in music. And if you're an educator, the same thing happens every time you get in front of a class. Like, all right, that worked. I'm going to tweak this way. I'm going to add that. I'm going to push them a little bit further. And if you're really doing it well, which is impossible to do, not impossible, but hard to do for a sustained period of time, you are constantly pushing yourself and the kids. And it feels like the struggle is to not get complacent. Like, all right, I know I can get them to do this. If I do this, great. And so I'm going to do this at this point of the year, and maybe I'll try something. How do you not get comfortable? Because if you listen to any of these albums that we're talking about, these are artists who were pushing what they did. They were trying not to be comfortable.
Yep. I'll tell you what, I also think it's like, there's some aspect of like asset mapping, right? Like figuring out who you, like one of the things that I learned really early on in my life was that when I got to college and I realized that I didn't actually know what Harvard was. Like I had been to Harvard, I had debated there. And then when I got to college, I was like, oh, this is why people try so hard. Cause I went to the school called Texas State University. And I realized that when I get into the work world,
shout out to
people
Texas State.
Me. Yeah, shout out to Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas.
Both my sisters graduated from Texas State. It's an amazing school.
Bobcats, man, I had a great time there. But I realized like when I get older, the Texas State badge doesn't mean what what the MIT badge means or the Harvard badge. And it's completely unfair. It's completely ridiculous. Like in my own workplace, like there are some times where I'm like straight up ignored, and then someone with the degree comes in the room and says the same thing that Mike said. And all of a sudden it's the new strategy, you know? So but I think there's what I learned to do very early on is I was like, if I can build my bench, the bench around me, if I can build the voices, if I can build my crew, like my version of the dungeon, then I can become unstoppable. Because if I'm always surrounded by people who I like learning from, then like I will always have something new to pursue, something new to build. Like I freaking love being from Texas because I was born and raised here. So the person that I think about when I think about this whole neo soul movement, behind every single person that we have mentioned on this podcast so far, is Robert Glasper.
Oh, Robert Glasper!
Wow.
Oh
right?
Okay.
Like,
I thought you were going to say Pino Palladino, but
that would have been another good choice.
That would have been another, yeah. But I mean, Glasper's like composing and compiling most of this music. And I listened to this interview of him on 97.9 The Box in Houston, and they said, "How did you make your career?" And he said he got really close to the host. He was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "This is how I made my career. I put my shoulder on somebody else's shoulder." He's like, "So when I saw Jay Dilla over there, I was like, hey." When I saw Questlove, like I put my, you know, like, and then he tells the story about Lauryn Hill and all that stuff, you know. But like Lauryn Hill's a great example. Like, you know, I have this hot take that like she was a one-hit wonder because she burned the bridges around her. And if you guys are interested, don't take my word for it. Go look up the Robert Glasper interview where he talks about how all of these brilliant minds, she had these brilliant minds and didn't realize what she had, burned the bridges, and then could not produce the art anymore. So for me, it's like any educator, like when you're tired, like
it's your community, man. It's your community.
Yeah, that's it. Like you got to surround
building
yourself.
Your people.
Yeah, like you should be able to. I used to, the ISS teacher in my second, third year of teaching, she was about to retire, and she told me straight up. She was like, "Yates, 1, get out of here. Don't stay here. Don't get stuck. And 2, she was like, I'm tired and I need help." Right. So I would go into her classroom, like on if I saw her in the morning and she was like, it's one of those days, I would take my off period and I would go in there and I would teach in the ISS classroom. I would do projects. I would do like, we did this like vote or die campaign thing in the ISS classroom. And it became this thing where they were like, actually ISS is kind of lit in there. Like, it's kind of fun. Like we you know, like, we're learning real content, you know, in ISS. In school suspension is what ISS is, by the way.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was, I think it's about those people you keep around you, right? Like that's why this podcast is so powerful, and I hope we do keep doing more of these, because like building the bench around you is like so vital. It's so important. That's right. That's right.
I love that. I mean, I grew up in Lesotho, super communal. Like everything, religion was spiritual, learning was spiritual, like, and communal, right? Like everything was deeply intertwined. And then I moved to Massachusetts, and it was the opposite. Right. And everyone looked like me, unlike Lesotho, but it was like out of a sci-fi movie. I was in a different land, in a different world. Had to go to therapy as a kid, like, you know, really, really, really depressed because my reality was shifted. And when I first started teaching, I felt that same Massachusetts vibe, right? Even in Hawaii, where I was teaching. And it wasn't until we created a communal learning environment, which is actually really core to how Native Hawaiians teach and live in kind of learning communities, that I felt like I was transported back to Lesotho, right? Where we were in this digital journalism class. We had different skills, we had different capacities, and we came together and built our products and our projects together, where I was like, this is what learning is, right? Us communing, sharing stories, seeing each other's strengths and weaknesses and jumping in and helping each other. And, you know, it doesn't matter if you're an adult or a teenager, like that's what brought kind of joy and humanity. at least in my space. And that's what Voodoo is, right? It's
That's
these
right.
people that love each other.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
Building things together, right? And you know that there's like,
Mhm.
if you've ever sung, if you've ever played an instrument, like that moment, you know, that chicken skin, like goosebumps moment where
100%.
your soul is out of your body, right? And you are feeling it. Like Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, like when that comes into the classroom, right? And I'm not talking about like weirdly making everything about religion, but like when that incredible like sense of community comes into the classroom, like that's where we have to try to, I don't know, take hold of it.
I love that, and I feel like what you're, if you've ever been in any sort of band or collective or played a team sport where that comes together, where this guy really can't go left. You know this. This guy can't dribble left. He can't drive left. The other team doesn't know that. And so I don't know why this is becoming a basketball analogy, but I'm going to make it a basketball analogy.
It's a good one.
You
It's
have
a
the
good
ball.
one.
The other
Keep
team
going.
doesn't know this, but your teammates know that you're going to pass, and they know that you're going to draw the defense away, where you can rotate the ball and hit your other friend who probably can't dribble at all, your other teammate. But if he's open in the corner, he's going to hit that three. And the idea of being able to wordlessly work together to create a series of those scenarios where you are using everyone's weaknesses and strengths to move forward as a unit, that there is nothing more magical than that. And to what Mike's saying earlier about the idea of doing projects, I mean, it sounds like a broken record, but that's like one of the unspoken strengths of PBL education.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Go for it, Mike. Add
No,
on to
man,
that.
I mean, you brought up basketball, which took me back. Like, I tell people all the time, the only part of regular school that I miss is coaching hoops. Like, and when I was early in my coaching journey, there was this coaching legend in Austin named Harvey Rhodes. And what I found is that if you're a young aspiring basketball coach, find the guy from 2 generations back who's tired of the attitudes of the current generation and just wants to teach, and they will teach you everything you need. Like, Harvey Rhodes was the coach at LBJ High School when Ray Jackson, who was part of the Fab Five, was there. So he coached Ray Jackson, and that team was legendary because they went on this streak where they hadn't like lost in 6 years. Like, they just kept winning until they got to the state, so they won or lost, whatever. And then I also like took advantage of the fact that Larry Brown, who to this day I argue is the greatest basketball mind that is still living on planet Earth, he was in Dallas. He was coaching at SMU, and both of them, what they would say was consistent. Like, Harvey told me, Harvey and I actually ended up coaching at the same school. We were at this private Baptist school in Austin, and I was like, "How did you guys hire him?" And they were like, "Well, he just wants to teach basketball. He doesn't want to deal with egos." And so he was coaching the 8th grade girls team, and I would go in there and watch him, and I would talk to him after, and he would give me his whole playbook. One day I was like, "Aren't you frustrated that this is the talent that we have?" And he was like, "No, because it doesn't matter what talent we have. It matters that they play together." And I would hear him say this, and then I would just soak it in. And both of our teams went undefeated that year because our game plan was sick. It was awesome. Like, I have a defense that is almost unstoppable. Like, it was great. But at the end of the day, we had to convince those players that, like, you play for the person next to you. You dive on the floor because you need to get that ball back for the guy next to you, right? So, and as I grew in my coaching journey, every successful coach, Shaka Smart was another person who, like, he was like an unofficial mentor where I literally snuck into the Frank Irwin Center and like hid to watch their practices. And he would say the same thing. And I'm like, man, this carries across like different fields, right? Like, if you can convince the students in your classroom that their learning is directly linked and tied to every other person in that room and even in that school building, then you've
that there's
done
actual outcomes and relevance. Totally.
That's right. That's the magic. Yeah.
Take that to the next level. Why does it mean something? When you're playing a sport, you're winning the game. You win the game, maybe you win the league, you get to the championship. If you're in the classroom, it's not about the test score.
Right.
I don't know if we're allowed to curse on this podcast, so I'm just going to say, fuck the tests. It is about how relevant what you're doing is in the real world.
Totally. And to
Mm-hmm.
your learners' lives.
Exactly. And so I love what you're talking about, because you're, like right now we're on this podcast and we're all playing for each other except for Jack. Jack is not playing. He's waiting on the bench. He's going to come in, but we're all playing for each other because we all love and respect one another, and so we are looking to feed each other the ball when necessary. We're looking to support each other's points because our greater good is, hey, let's get this message out. What you're describing with mentors, I feel like I've had that with educators. I've definitely had that like with musicians that I love, where they would just let me come in and sit in on sessions and watch, not pick up an instrument, not do anything, just be in the room and see how they work with one another. And the idea of like, I'm sure you guys feel the same way. I would want an educator or a creative or a musician or an entrepreneur to listen to this and be like, oh, I could do that too, because we can all do it. And we're all under this myth of like, well, I didn't go to the right school, or I'm not the right person to say it. And all of that is BS. We literally just have to be in it. Just do it actively and consistently.
And I'm gonna tell you, for every teacher, I mean, every educator, like, I'm gonna suggest that you go to a place to watch the community happen in live time. You don't have to believe what happens here, but you should go to particularly a Black Pentecostal charismatic church and just watch the band. When things get hype,
done.
Watch that drummer look over to the keyboard player, and the keyboard player flash a number, and they're in it.
Yep.
And the singers follow. The whole building follows, right? Like if I've been, I play worship music too, so I've seen, like we have whole conversations with hands and glances. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so like when you see that happen, you can watch it in the orchestra, but it's not the same thing. I'm telling you, like, go watch hopefully the building doesn't have any air conditioning. Hopefully it's a one-room church. I'm talking like in Austin, Texas, there's a small Kojic Church of God in Christ church called Open Door Church. It is literally 600 square feet. You go sit in that back row and watch that drummer tell everybody in the front row and the bass player and the guitar player what's about to happen. And then just, you can leave after that. You don't even have to stay for the message. Just leave after that. But just see it happen, because like, I mean, like I wanted to get to, I always longed for this in my teaching career. And it happened for me at one point, but I wanted to be able to look across the hall and give a nod, and the teacher knows, oh, he's got to go to the bathroom, or, oh, he needs help with, like I wanted that. And, the place where I found it was this school where we built, where there literally were no classrooms, right? Like when you take people outside of those boxes, like beautiful things can happen. But like, I'll never forget it. There's this woman, her name's Cecilia. She runs this, now she runs a whole campus of this school that we built in Austin, but she runs the one that's at SpaceX now. And she is this, just like very brilliant, very perceptive. And so like, I'm teaching a level that I like, a level of students, a grade level of students that I don't normally work with. And she just came over and sat on the floor. And when she sat on the floor, the amount of calm that like swept over everybody was just like, oh, like, oh, Ceci's here, it's gonna be okay. Like, so like those moments are, I think, what we should be living for as educators. Like they can't just exist outside of the school. So go see them happen, and then like make them happen in your school.
Yeah, because you recognize it, you see it, and you recognize it. And you're talking about watching that drummer and seeing what he does to the front row, feeling it. You could be in there with your eyes closed.
That's right.
And you'll probably, and it'll come like a wave. It'll hit you even harder. See, Jack, I got a surfing reference in there. It'll hit you even harder.
That's right.
That.
And I think about the term flow state and how tech bro-y it's become.
Yeah.
But that's what the flow state is.
Yeah.
Right. It is us feeling something deeply powerful, and us feeling interconnected in a really powerful and potent way. And you need time. You need time and you need respect in your community to be able to do that. Like, you can't rush. I've been so guilty of rushing to authenticity. It's the biggest, like, looking back on my young teaching career. And I had a student that was like, you can't rush this stuff. We'll trust each other when we trust each other. No prompt is going to get me there.
Ooh, that's real.
No
That's real.
query. Like, we're going to get there. So if we don't give time and create environments, right? Like, there's too much like PBL pockets, like maker spaces in school. And then kids go back to the shitty reality of AP tests, right? Or the shitty reality of Sage on a Stage, right? I know we've all been guilty of being in schools like this, right? Where there's a space and pocket of freedom and choice, and then they go back into what school is. And like, that is confusing, right? Because we're not giving them the time to build that trust with each other. And so how do we get there? Like, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
It's more than confusing. It's deceiving, because that's not what life is. I was having this conversation with someone recently. I was talking about, some of the kids that I work with now. The one, and I don't teach a class. I'll push into things and I'll help facilitate things, but I don't have classes of my own anymore. I'll have kids I work with one-on-one, and whenever they're going off to college, I give them what I call the speech. You've gotten into this school. This is a great school. You're going to graduate in a couple weeks. No one will care what you did here.
Right.
Because that's not what life is about. No one's going to care. And you're going to go to this college. You're going to do some really interesting things there. And it's going to be really fun. And you're going to learn a lot. You're going to meet people. But as far as your grades, no one will care what you got into intro to comparative studies of medieval hair weaving and underwater basket carvings. No one will care. What they will care about is your ability to connect with someone one-on-one, to follow through on something you say you're going to do, to be comfortable with your discomfort of not knowing how to do something. The expectations that the world has for us, or the barriers for success, have nothing to do with the constructs that we create within most classrooms.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to end this podcast. I want you to know, listeners, viewers, this is one of many conversations. I'm saying this so Kwaku might have to come back. This is one of many conversations about Soulquarians and just education in general. Kwaku, where can people find you on socials, in the world?
Twitter, I guess, is the easiest. I'm more of a reposter than a poster, but I'm deep in the DMs on these conversations, and I love to connect with people and hear about what they're working on. So
what's
at Kwaku1, there's another guy who got there first. I don't know who at Kwaku is. All the power to you.
It's Jack.
At Kwaku1.
It's actually Jack.
Was it Jack?
Yeah, it was Jack. It was totally Jack. Yeah. Mike, where can people find you?
LinkedIn or Twitter. Man, at Mike, that guy, that jerk, he hasn't tweeted in 10 years. Right? He won't give up. He won't give it up. And at Mike Yates, he won't give it up either. But you can find me at just Mike Yates, and then LinkedIn.
Just huge mahalo for being here. I think about Fela Kuti's line, "Music is the weapon." I think about the lessons we can take from creators that have been so impactful in our lives. You can find us at Unrulr.com. You can find us on Instagram, on LinkedIn, where we just repost Mike Yates posts.
I'm on LinkedIn doing that too. I forgot to mention
that. You can find us on Twitter as well. Thank you for watching. Like, share, send this out to your people, get us out into the world, and just love you guys. Thanks for being here.
Hey, shout out to Unrulr, man. Yeah. I know so many people who are using it right now. I know kids of kids from the school that I'm at who just had an amazing outdoor experiential journey for the past week, and they're about to be putting stuff on there as well. So you guys aren't saying it, but if you don't know about Unrulr, you should be looking for that. And this is
Seriously.
part of creating those settings that we've been talking about.